This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Thank you very much, Lauren, for doing this call. I'm really curious to hear more about changing how teams think.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren. So I'm going to talk to you today about a recent experience of working with a back-end engineering team. Just a little bit about my history of kind of come through tech from like the beginning to product manager. So started off with basic SEO, moving to customer support and pay-per-click ads. Then that was horrible because who wants to deal with customer support? Then went to like basic website support internally, which turned into product and application support, beginning to work with development teams and product managers, and then to many years of agile coaching, and then into product management. Yeah, so quick history, and then just some of the companies that I've been with, coaching teams. It's just a few of them for some background. So worked with a diverse group of teams, which has been a lot of experience, have to say. But I'm just going to kind of talk about my most recent experience where I've been at N26 for over a year now. I started with the team as their agile coach, and then we lost our product manager for many months, and so I decided to apply for that position. So I transitioned to their product manager, which actually wasn't a really big change. It was a little bit shift in what I was focusing on, but it's still kind of been the same process of coaching the teams and how do we get to where we want to be. So I'm just going to kind of run through that experience with you. So this is a back-end team. What's different kind of about a back-end product team? Really nothing. I mean, they might think so, but it's still a product team. It's still, they're, taking problems, doing discovery, putting together solutions, and then, of course, they are deploying those solutions to our customers, which are internal engineers. I would say the one thing that has been kind of different is really that mindset. It's sometimes hard to have that customer-centric mindset when you're doing a back-end product and you consider yourself a customer. You tend to forget that developers outside of you have a different perspective. And so it's getting them to think of, hey, we're actually solving problems for customers, not just, doing cool things with technology. So joining this team, this is the first time I've actually worked with a purely, I'm going to say like back-end technical team, and not with also customer facing or what we would say more traditional product teams. So the goal of this product is what we want. We want a consistent platform that's compliant, secure, and easy to use for our developers. Okay, so that developers don't have to worry about infrastructure and that we can kind of take those complexities out of the process for them. But in reality, what did we have? When I joined the team, we had many pieces of infrastructure kind of all over the place for observability, monitoring, integrating their code, deploying their code. When they've tried to do different migrations to new tools, which they were doing to upgrade, they never really finished migrations. So instead of having a nice, consistent platform, we're kind of supporting, services on older tech stacks. So there were never any agreements kind of how we should work across the tech department. So it made it confusing. It's still confusing for engineers because they're really not sure how their service is set up. They could have 10 services and they're all set up completely different on the infrastructure. So that makes it hard to support, and it also makes it, if you're a new hire joining the company, to kind of understand the foundation of your service. So just some of the challenges outside of just the product itself. They didn't really think of the platform as solving problems, like customer problems. It was more solving technical problems. How can we make it faster? How can we make it better? Not, is this actually the right solution to solve the right problem? And that takes it back to engineers as customers. A lot of times they don't talk to customers because they feel, hey, we're engineers, we know how they use it. We don't really need to talk to customers. So this kind of isn't the right mindset. Also, too much work in progress, which leads to there's no decision making. So the teams would have, let's say one team, when I look at their backlog, had 13 initiatives and 45 epics, but they were all kind of working on at the same time. And we're like, okay, let's narrow this down, like, because if we have too many things in progress, we're actually not getting things done and we're not delivering value. Which kind of goes to that decision making, is the leadership team really wasn't making any hard decisions because they didn't have a clear vision of where we really want to go with this. And another issue is that this platform team works in a silo and doesn't really communicate as much with the broader tech org of the decisions that they're making. So one reason why migrations aren't successful is because they never kind of get commitment from the tech org to kind of come to agreements that this migration for a new service is needed, or that everyone understands the value and that we're all committed to migrating by a certain time so we can deprecate an older tool. So just coming to those like mutual agreements is a big problem. So kind of this is as an agile coach and also a product manager is where to start. There's so many things you can do with teams. Do we do workshops about, customer product mindset? Do we teach them about release planning and road mapping, agile principles, team practices working together? There's many different directions that you can come to when you're trying to kind of get a team to get more aligned. So the one thing that I kind of always look at when I'm going into a situation with teams is that teams are never, or they're rarely broken. Okay. Your development process is not a unique snowflake. I've had teams where they're like, oh, we need these custom JIRA fields, custom everything. And I'm like, you're not special. Just like your development process still follows the same kind of flow in general. So you can still use a lot of the same techniques across teams, just finding which ones work for the teams. Now, teams are complex dynamic systems. Teams themselves are snowflakes, how they interact with each other, how they come to decisions. These are where you kind of have to take your time to kind of understand them and see what motivates them and how they operate so that the change can be successful. But the biggest key to change, and this is kind of around all change management, is leadership. If your leadership is not behind you or supporting you, and they're not supporting you as a change champion, then you're really not going to get very far. Change can come from the bottom up, but it's extremely hard. And of course, if it's a larger company, I don't want to say it's impossible, but I haven't personally had experience with successful change from the bottom up that impacts the whole company. You can kind of make that change across a department, but your leadership team and managers, that culture trickles down. So your senior leadership and having them buy in is a big part of that. And to do that is gaining trust. So gaining trust with not only my senior leadership to know that I'm there to support them, but also with the teams, so that when I do come in with anything, they realize that I'm there to help them. I'm not there for my ego or to, for fame or glory. It's really just to help them out. So what I decided with this team is to, they had a really good team. And one thing I will say with this team is of all the companies I've worked and teams I've worked with, this is the first group of around 30, 40 engineers where pretty much all of them were just, they wanted change. They were like, tell me what to do. What are we doing wrong? This isn't the normal situation for an agile coach, or I think most product managers when you go to teams. But they knew they had issues because the company had scaled so fast. So with them, it was easy to start with like changing behaviors, but I also wanted to make sure that we weren't implementing too many changes. So they were getting change fatigue. Like they were so apt to change that they never did anything consistently for a long period to really see it work and to kind of do that continuous improvement in a more thoughtful way. So what I kind of go about is if we can change behaviors And if those behaviors become habits and they just get used to doing them, those habits become culture. It's kind of the Shuha approach of just follow the book. Then you can start to, iterate on those techniques. Then you can start to make them your own. So it's kind of like this stepping stone for them. Like at first, they might not understand all the things I'm asking up front, but then after a while, they start to see the value in it. So here's some successes that we've had kind of to start with. We started with like consistent format for, say, basic things like stories and epics. Like make sure when I read your stories, I can understand them and why they're important. My technical background is very limited. I've only done like a development boot camp, and I know HTML and CSS, but I am not understanding the backend infrastructure and our like container strategy and things like that. So getting them to write things in a simple, non-threatening way, when I tell them I really only want a couple sentences, that's all I need. Tickets would have paragraphs and paragraphs of content in there, and then no one could really digest what was the end goal of that. Same for epics, getting them to think about, okay, fine, create an epic, but just tell me, what do you expect from this? What's the outcome? And just kind of write down some success metrics. So just kind of keeping things really simple, maybe just 3 sentences, just starting to get them to think about the goals and why they were doing things. And then we've also been doing a lot better with planning and prioritization. So getting them to think ahead for, say, about 2 months and putting that into Jira and having that at least in there so that we can work on prioritization. And also giving them the focus by taking that responsibility for them to decide off of them. So I can go through them with their epics or initiatives, and I can like just focus on these 2 epics. And they're like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yes. Like I want you to focus on the outcomes, and then we can move on to the next thing." So a big part is like limiting that work in progress, and also with that focus, getting them to break their work down into smaller chunks so that we could prioritize easier. So instead of prioritizing a whole project that seems daunting over a year, I'm like, let's try to get to some good milestones along the way, because they didn't feel they were also delivering value, because again, their goals were so far out and they hadn't think of like bite-sized chunks of, hey, in a couple months we can do this. So it gets, as an engineer, it gets a little demotivating to be working on something for 6 months or a year and not seeing that impact that it has on customers. So again, with that planning and prioritization, we're helping them give those small goals so they can get feedback from the other engineering teams. They're like, hey, this is great. So happy you finally did this, which is good for our engineers to feel. I just kind of put together some information because with the teams, what I was doing is tracking their throughput. I didn't force the teams to work in any particular way. I let them choose if they wanted to do Scrum or Kanban or whatever. I've been in Agile long enough that I am not a purist. I am really just kind of more of the team follows the practices and principles and they work well together. I'm not going to force them to do anything because I want their commitment and buy-in to whatever we're doing. So this is just some graphs from when we first started, I think 6 months ago, and then in between 4 months, and then recently I just got some data for them. So this is just how many stories or their throughput was when I had just started working with them to where they are now. Now, I'm not going to say every team has improved like drastically, and we've also had a lot of changes, especially with this last year with Corona and things like that. So people have left. We've had teams change, which of course is always going to kind of change how a team performs together when we add new people or people leave. So yeah, it's not like it's a perfect happy fairy tale where every team is improved by 2 times. But what we have gotten to a point is that most teams are consistent now. So we can plan. So when I do have them put together an epic and just write some high level stories, I can give them a high level estimate of, hey, maybe you've overestimated that you're not going to get this done in 2 months. Yeah, some teams do use story points, but some teams don't. So for me, throughput was just a consistent measure to use across all the teams. I mean, again, they're not compared against each other. It's just their particular throughput for their own planning. I am a use metrics for good, not evil person. And then also this is to kind of show like how many teams have gotten more consistent. And some of the teams that where they've gotten less consistent is because their teams have shifted a lot. Where we've lost, we did have high turnover last year, so they've had a lot of flux in some of these teams. But many of the teams definitely improve. This is over every 2 weeks, their throughput. So about that consistency of how now they can plan better and make prioritization decisions and push things off appropriately because they can have better conversations with stakeholders to be like, oh, like we kind of understand the scope of this and the amount of work, so we can set better expectations when we're working with stakeholders outside the team and within our own team or group. Yeah, so things that are still in process. Estimations. I like using story points and estimations because for me, I like the teams to talk about the work so we can get that tacit knowledge out of their head. So if one person thinks the story is easy, another person thinks it's hard, story pointing or estimating will kind of get that knowledge out. But again, I'm not forcing it on teams, and I let them do it at their own. And if they start to have problems, I might offer it as, hey, this might solve your problem. But again, not forcing them to do anything. We're still getting better at our prioritization. That's because we're starting to get better with giving the teams a clearer vision. But this has actually been harder with my leadership team. Because they're coming out of this startup mode, a lot of times they feel like they don't want to micromanage or force this vision on teams when I'm trying to get across to them, well, really, the teams need this vision so they can do their work and plan better. So my leadership team is definitely getting better at that as well. And then cross-team planning, and kind of goes along with department communication. We're getting much better at cross-team planning because of how our teams are set up. As a platform team, it's a little more component-based than like you own a whole problem area. So kind of teams own different parts of the infrastructure. So we are getting better at this because we're a little more consistent and we can understand when we could complete our work. We can prioritize dependencies better, and we are improving at that. And department communication. So how we communicate with security and compliance, which is really big for us since we're a bank in a regulated industry. And then also with the tech department, so they understand our goals and how we need them to help us with migrations, but also that we need to understand the tech department and product goals so that we can prepare our infrastructure. Say if we want to go into new markets or we have some new products and we need to integrate with third parties, how can we help that? Yeah, so, but everyone's doing great. And the one thing that I do have to say that I'm hearing from teams is almost in all of the meetings I attend with them, I hear them talk about business value or how this impacts our customers. So the biggest thing is like that mind shift is there, and they're starting to think about planning and prioritization based on the customer impact, not just on improving the tech stack. It's not perfect yet, but it's now, I think every team, it's a focus for them because we put together kind of goals or OKRs as everyone has. I think we've all been through that OKR phase with our companies. But I tried to keep them simple, and I try not to use the term OKR as much and just use these are the goals that we want and the outcomes that we want. So how can we work towards those as like our group? Because I don't want people to get overwhelmed with OKRs, and like really it's just our goals and success metrics to make sure we're on track so we can then change our strategy if needed. So I think they're probably still a little hesitant with me on that because of all the work they had in progress. Trying to set these goals was overwhelming them. So like, just take a step back. Let's get to a good point with our infrastructure to be consistent, and then we can really start to focus on being more impactful with our customers. So that's a very high level
Right,
thing.
Lauren.
I'm not sure if it
Thank
was
you.
helpful to anybody.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing your insights on how you changed how your teams think. Questions, reflections. I can pick on individuals as I would if we were meeting in person. It's a little bit harder here with the body language, but I thought it was really interesting. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else has had experiences with their teams trying to change the mindset or culture.
Why don't we jump to Hamburg? Jörg, are you with us?
Yeah.
There you are.
Oh, yeah, I can relate to some of the things that you just told us, Lauren. I had similar, well, kind of sort of like issues at companies where I worked before, where sort of like there was a very strong like pure technical focus and not so much on the like user values, and that is very important to like get the team to understand what they're building and how that actually affects users and how it benefits them. So I think that's the biggest change. One question that I had from your talk is that you basically said you're doing the product management, but to me it seems like you're sort of like juggling two hats, like agile coach at the same time and product manager. How does that work out for you personally?
It's been a lot. It's been less of the agile coaching. Well, I feel like right now it's a little bit of project management because I need to get to them a good point. But I'm excited to do more product management things and shadow the developers and see how they set up microservices. Um, so it is kind of juggling a lot, but I still kind of think agile is like a mindset. But I have backed away from a lot of like their ceremonies. Like I'll go in now, but I don't facilitate anymore. Like they're all adults, they can do this, they can do the refinements. For a couple other teams that I'm not as involved with, I will do the retros. But I have there's 4 groups and like 8 teams, so we are looking for more product managers, so I can kind of keep it the high level. Yeah, so it has been a challenge, but I'm trying to put more focus on the product side. Like an issue is it's really hard to talk to our developers because I think they've been neglected for so long by platform that like it's hard for me to get shadowing sessions. It's hard for me to get that buy-in. A lot harder than I thought it would be.
Mhm.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
What quick follow-up, do we have like a formalized, like we have formalized agile coach roles in N26? Like do you hire people as agile coaches to support the teams or?
yes, we do. I was hired as an agile coach. I think we have agile coaches in all of our offices, but more in Berlin. And they're usually dedicated to like a group or like a broader like group of tech teams. So that's where I was. I was with this group and then became their team, became their product manager. We have asked them like, do you guys want another agile coach? Right now they're okay. A lot of our biggest issues is really just it's from leadership. It's like the tech vision for things and just prioritization. So that's our biggest challenge.
Thank
All
you very
right.
much for the insights.
Thank you. How about jumping to Switzerland? In Switzerland, we have Antti.
Yeah, hey, very interesting conversation. I was wondering if you'd made any changes to how you write stories, user stories, because I'm thinking that even the task that you assign to a backend engineer ultimately has to benefit the end user. So if in the story you say, we are doing this for this reason, and that's the end goal for the end user, maybe at least it puts things into perspective, helps them realize why something is done. Just
Yeah,
maybe.
no, we've definitely done that. That was one of the like changes of just do this, like really try to think of it from that customer perspective. But then I think the pushback I get, they're like, well, what if it's just purely technical? I'm like, well, try to think about why you're doing it and tie it to that. But even like a service can be a customer. Like even like another machine, it can be the customer. So getting them to think of like even in that state. Um, again, there's some tickets where I'm like, if it's just technical, it's okay. If it's tech debt, don't worry. But yeah,
some
that's a really,
things are done for pure performance reasons, so something has to be done in the back end.
yeah.
It doesn't have a linkage, but many things have a linkage and have a reason in the end user experience.
So yeah, that was a really important step that we did.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're coming up at the end. I'm not gonna continue to pick on people. Thank you, Antti. Thank you, Jörg. But a big thank you, of course, to you, Lauren. Any closing questions, remarks?
Thanks.
All
This
right.
was really interesting, and it's something that I dealt with myself a while ago, and it's always interesting to hear how other people handle these more internal products. It can be really frustrating, as you pointed out, if leadership is not behind you.
Yes, thank you,
Common.
Lauren. All right. Perfect on time. Thank you very much once again, Lauren. Thank you for doing it. I'll share the notes and your slides, and we'll see each other again soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.